You've taken a wrong turn down Creep Street.
Citizens of the Milky Way, my name is Dylan Hackworth.
I'm Maureen Bogey.
And this is Creep Street. Real quick up top, as always, if you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts, please go into that app, hit us with that sweet 5 stars. It helps us out tremendously.
It's so cool to do.
But listen to where you like to listen to most, whether it's, I don't know, Spotify,
Castbox.
Stitcher, CastBox, Podbean, whatever.
So many good apps
Whatever,
these
Luminary,
days.
whatever you want to play. You listen where you want to listen to, all right? Second of all, follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Creep Street Podcast, Twitter at Creep Street Pod. And this is the final episode of Listener Suggestion Month. Our listener suggestion comes from none other than Mr. James Watkins out of the UK.
Yes.
On Instagram at Earth to Jam. Really great guy. He was also one of our, much like Nicola Pascal was one of our first. So yes, thank you, James. God, we love James. He's a great guy.
Oh my gosh, this is so exciting, and what a great suggestion.
Just because this is the last episode of Listener Suggestion Month doesn't mean we're going to stop doing listener suggestions. We're going to screw in those listener suggestions when it fits the theme.
So reach out at any time, you guys,
Reach out.
and let us know your suggestions.
Yeah.
We'll put it in whenever we can.
But good God, have I been yakking.
You're a little yacker.
What are we talking about today?
Okay, today we are talking about the exorcism of Anneliese Michel.
Ooh, this is a big one.
This one is very spooky scary.
Do you think it's going to be our scariest episode yet?
Yes.
Just real quick up top, goes without saying, we're going to be talking about a demonic possession, but whether you believe in demonic possession or not, or if you believe that Anneliese was just severely mentally ill and was being neglected, you are just as right in believing that. At the end of the day, what we have to remember is that this happened to a real young lady who suffered something so horrible that no one should have to endure, whether it was demonic possession or anything else. Let's just respect the fact that this was a human being that suffered something unimaginable.
Yeah.
But with that out of the way, let's get started.
This whole vibe, this whole journey we're going on is in Germany.
Right.
So you're probably thinking to yourself, hold on, her name was Anneliese Michel. It's pronounced differently, but we're saying Anneliese Michel.
Right. I've heard it pronounced Michel. I've also heard just Michelle.
Michelle. Some people
too,
say
so.
Annalisa. We're going with Anneliese Michel.
Right. But obviously, not out of disrespect, that's just how we've most frequently heard it.
Yes,
so.
exactly. Her story is incredibly famous because her exorcism really shook Germany, and it really changed the way that people viewed exorcisms and how they were allowed. And
Right.
yeah, so it was a very influential story in case.
This story is as much about what happened after the exorcism as it is about the exorcism.
Right.
It's as much about what played out in the courts and all that stuff.
Totally.
This was something that shocked people, and it really did shake the world. It shook the Catholic Church.
Some things that were influencing the time,
Right.
not just Anneliese herself, but just the whole world and just culture in general. A couple things. Vatican II had recently happened.
Vatican II, bigger, better.
Oh yeah, that's right. It was a movie.
Can't wait for that Vatican prequel.
Totally. Vatican II essentially was just, the Catholic Church was like, hey, guys, like, we're really old, and like some of the stuff we're doing, like, I think we need to change it. For example, they were like, hey, we keep saying Mass in Latin, and no one really knows Latin, so let's
Right.
say it the language of the area where it is. And that was kind of one of the main things, but a bunch of different things kind of like that. And so this got a lot of mixed reactions from people. Some people in the church were like, oh, this is great, we're kind of modernizing things. And then some people were like, this is terrible, we shouldn't be changing these,
Right.
like 1,000-year, more than 1,000,
Exactly,
you understand
right.
what I'm saying. Another thing that's important is that in 1973, the movie The Exorcist came out.
Ooh, yeah.
And I think we, or at least I, sometimes forget how big of an impact that movie made on
Yes.
people. It wasn't just like, oh, this is a really scary movie, you got to see it. People
Yes.
were upset.
The Satanic Panic will probably get its own episode because it's really just a fascinating part of popular culture. But it was really hot in the 70s. People were like, good God, Satan is real and he is here.
It kind of reignited the idea of exorcisms.
Right.
Like, exorcisms weren't really at front of mind for people for a long time.
Exactly.
And then in the 70s and in the 60s too, but especially in the 70s, exorcisms kind of became more popular even too, because it was just people thought about them more. So that's just a little bit about the world that this is all happening in. Anneliese Michel went through 67 different exorcism sessions. A lot of the time, I think we think of exorcisms as being like a one and done thing. It's like you have a one exorcism and then it works or it doesn't, and then that's it. When really it rarely ever happens. Often you need to have multiple. You can take breaks within them. It can be different. So she had 67 exorcism sessions.
It's like going to a chiropractor, just working out
those kinks, working out those demons. This was all within the course of about 10 months. She had 1 or 2 exorcisms a week, and they usually were about 4 hours-ish in length. And one of the priests that was conducting the exorcism, it really had a profound effect on him. And he actually was quoted as saying,
"The Klingenberg case was, for all those involved, a breathtaking experience. Someone outside cannot possibly appreciate this experience. Man's imagination is stretched past the limit when it comes to demonic possession." Father Ernst Alt.
Okay, now we're going to take it to the beginning, honey. Okay, so Anneliese, she was born in 1952 in Germany to a Catholic family. By the way, Klingenberg is like the area of where this was happening. So she was born 1952 to a Catholic family. Her parents both worked a lot. They actually both worked in sawmills. Both sides of her family had sawmills, which is weird, but
proud wood
cool.
family.
They just love wood.
They love sawing up wood.
Who doesn't love a good wood?
Loves just sawing wood.
I love wood. Her very religious grandmother was very involved with raising Anneliese and her sisters.
Right.
So their family was definitely very religious, but it seemed like it was a pretty normal household at the same time. It wasn't like absolutely crazy. But however, Anneliese's mother, her name is Anna. I know that's kind of confusing. So Anneliese's mother, Anna, she had a child named Marta out of wedlock before she got married to Anneliese's father, Joseph is his name. So she had a child out of wedlock with another man, not Joseph. That was such a big deal at the time that when Anna married Joseph, she actually had to wear a black veil on her wedding day to show her sin of having a child out of wedlock. And then Marta actually died when she was 8 years old, when Anneliese was 4 years old. That, made a huge impact on the family. That will come up again more later. So when Anneliese was really young, she was very, very sickly. Before she was 5 years old, she had the mumps, the measles, and scarlet fever. So yeah, she was sick a lot as a child. She had to miss a lot of school. But yeah, as she grew older though, it seemed like she kind of grew out of that. She seemed to be kind of improving and she was healthier.
Yeah, she was hitting the gym, taking her vitamins.
Oh my gosh, she was just like...
I think she was doing CrossFit.
Oh yeah, so she kind of grew out of that. In school, she did well. She was a very smart person. She was a good student. She took Latin in school and she took to that very quickly. She played instruments, and like I said before, she was definitely shy and religious, but she was like a normal kid. And she actually really, more than anything, she wanted to be a school teacher. She wanted to be a teacher so bad. She was already thinking about it, when she was young, in her early teens. She had already decided that's what she wanted to do. Her mom thought that's what she wanted to do. She also was considering being a catechist as well, which basically just means it's like a teacher for Catholicism. And Anneliese, before any of these issues that we're going to start talking about in a minute happened, she already wanted to atone for the sins of people around her. She wanted to atone for the sin of her mother, having a child out of wedlock. She would see drug addicts sleeping at the train station, and she wanted to atone for them so that they were saved from going to hell. So she would actually sleep on the floor sometimes, just on her own volition. So you feel bad for her that she already feels like she has all of this pressure on her, but at the same time, it's also very endearing. She really, really cares about other people and wants to and truly believes in the power of God. Now here we are. We're at 1968. She's almost 16 and she's at school, and she has this kind of like weird blackout thing at school where she loses consciousness.
Right.
She was with her friend and they kind of just laughed it off. They were like, that was kind of weird, but like whatever.
Fainting spell. I mean, I feel like people were just expected to faint. Especially women were just expected to faint more often.
I grew up thinking that I was going to faint a lot because apparently in every movie or TV show, women are just out here fainting. Right. Then that night, she is asleep and she wakes up at midnight and she cannot breathe and she cannot move. Some of you might be thinking of our Shadow People episode.
It's ringing some bells.
And what is happening is it sounds a lot like sleep paralysis.
Yes.
And so if you haven't listened to our Shadow People episode where we talk about sleep paralysis, essentially what sleep paralysis is that your mind wakes up before your body wakes up. And there are a lot of ideas about what is sleep paralysis. Some people say it's solely a neurological event that's not serious at all. It just kind of happens. Some people think that it has to do with spirits or demons or anywhere in between. So she was experiencing this. She was laying on her bed and she felt a really intense pressure on her chest. She was completely locked up. Her tongue was super sore, super tight. This lasted for about 15 minutes.
Oof.
And the pressure on her was so intense that she actually wet the bed. And so that happened and she was like, oh, that was super scary and weird. But she was kind of embarrassed about it. So she like changed the sheets on her bed and told her mom like, oh, I must be sick. I was like sweating in the night. She didn't want to be like, hi, I'm 16 and I just pissed myself. Then it happened again. And then finally they went to go see a doctor about this. They're named Dr. Luthi, I believe is how it's pronounced. He did an EEG on her, basically just like checked out her brain, you know. It looked totally normal. But the thing is with those tests is they only show what's happening at that moment while you're taking the test.
Right.
At least at the time. I don't know if things are different now. But so the test doesn't mean that nothing ever happened. It just meant that nothing was happening then. So he was like, okay, I think this is probably you're having seizures is what he thought. But he was like, since you've only had 2 so far, I'm not going to prescribe you anything. And I just want to kind of keep an eye on this.
He was like child's play.
He was
2?
like,
2? I don't get out of bed for anything less than 10 faints.
I know. Dr. Luthi was like, hey, I think that you're having these seizures, but keep this on the down low because I know you want to become a school teacher. And at the time, there was a lot of negative stigma connected with mental health issues. And he was worried that she would not be able to become a teacher if the colleges, found out that she was suffering from this. But then after that, she got really sick again. She had a lot of lung issues and like sore throat, trouble breathing, bronchial issues. And it was so bad that she actually had to go to a sanatorium for it, an inpatient program type thing. And she was there for a long time and she absolutely hated it. She was away from all of her friends, all of her family. And there were, other girls that were at this sanatorium as well. It wasn't like she was literally sitting in a room by herself the whole time, but her whole world that she knew she wasn't a part of it. And she said that she really had a hard time. And she had another attack, one of these kind of sleep paralysis, maybe seizure situations again when she was there, but this time she was able to scream. She actually wrote a letter to her mom while she was there, and she said, actually, I'm quite glad that I have been sick, since one comes to see things. One comes to recognize that there are other values besides money and riches which are worth living for, that one is on earth for the glory of God and not for transitory things. What is worse at the present time is the indifference towards our neighbors. People today can be so inhuman because all is going well for them. Really, the horrors of the last war ought to be imprinted on them. But today, that is all forgotten. Anneliese sent that to her mom.
That was a wise young lady.
She's a wise young lady.
She was a teenager, right?
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. But here she is later. She's still in the sanatorium. And she was looking out the window and she was praying the rosary. And all of a sudden, she said a overwhelming sense of beauty and peace surrounded her. And just, she could smell the most beautiful flowers. And she felt truly happy, at peace. She felt better than she had ever felt. But then all of a sudden, her friends were standing there and they were like, Anneliese, what are you doing? And she was like, what do you mean? And her friends were like, kind of broke her out of her trance. And they were like, your hands are super grotesque and weird. Her hands were like in these kind of like grotesque, unnatural looking position. And she had no idea. She didn't notice at all.
Getting flashes of Alyssa Lamb.
Yes.
The hands. And what's interesting is the dichotomy of how she was feeling. This feeling of elation, this feeling of joy and happiness, but then offset by what others are seeing.
It's very odd. And she thought that she was visited by the Virgin Mary. That's what she thought. That's why she felt so incredible in that moment. And a lot of people do attribute, not necessarily apparitions of the Virgin Mary, but a lot of people say that when they feel the Virgin Mary is around or if they feel Jesus is around, or if a very pleasant smell, often like flowers, like violets or roses. Some of you may be like, okay, this is really sounding like maybe bipolar disorder, because going from the really intense depressive state that she was in and then going right up to manic, feeling incredible so quickly.
Right.
Is that what was happening? Or
Right.
maybe something actually did visit her, but she did try to duplicate it later. She was like, that was such an incredible experience. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to pray my rosary. And then while she was praying her rosary, a huge evil face appeared before her in a flash, and it scared her. It really like shook her to her core. She was so scared to the point where she stopped praying, which is like wild for her.
Wow.
There's actually a word for it in German. It's called Fratzen, or it's probably Fratzen, if you say it correctly. There isn't an exact translation in English, but essentially it's just like really scary, demonic, ghostly faces. But later on, she had another EEG, was totally normal, and on August 29th, 1970, she was able to go back home. She was well enough to go back home, and she was so happy to go home, but right when she got back, her family, especially her sisters, said that she was different when she came back from the sanatorium. They said she was very, very introverted and very withdrawn. Beforehand, as we said, she was shy, but she was not withdrawn necessarily. Right. And I'm sure with her family, she was not very shy. It's
Right.
more so shy.
Right.
So once she got back, unfortunately, she would still have these attacks sometimes, these kind of blackouts or maybe seizures or whatever you want to call them. She would still have them. And a little bit later, she started saying that she was hearing knocks like all over her room, like within the walls, above the ceiling, below the floor.
Which is common with poltergeist.
At first, her mom thought that there was some sort of, she actually took her to get her hearing checked.
Right.
And the doctor was like, no, her hearing is totally fine. But then her sisters actually started to be able to hear the knocking as well.
Ooh.
So now this is different. This wasn't just her. This other people were like, I truly hear what this is happening. And Anna, her mother, said that one time she walked in and she saw Anneliese standing before their statue of the Virgin Mary, and her face was just full of hatred, and her eyes were jet black, which is weird for many reasons. Obviously, it's just weird, that's scary in general, but especially for Anneliese, she was all about the Virgin Mary,
Right,
she was like,
right.
I love the gal.
Exactly.
She was like, she's my number one homie. So then she got the German measles.
God.
If you're asking what the difference between the measles and the German measles are, the answer is I don't know. So this period of her life was especially hard for her. She just felt so depressed, unlike herself, and she was quoted as saying, "You cannot imagine the most awful dread. It is a terror which goes through all of my limbs and settles there. It is a dread that makes you think you are right there in the middle of hell. You are totally, utterly deserted. You can call all you want for help to the Mother of God, maybe, but they are all deaf." And she was also quoted later on by saying, "I became completely apathetic in those years, with no interest in anything that was going on. I was able to perceive, but not to experience. I felt like I was in a deep hole." And that sounds terrible. In 1973, she went to San Damiano. Basically, it's a holy shrine where you
Party all night.
party all night and you just fuck all day, baby. No.
That was Rajneeshpuram.
That actually was Rajneeshpuram. So they went to San Damiano to visit this shrine. It was a thing that a lot of people in her church and just churches throughout Europe would do. This one, there was a miracle that happened at this location, whether you believe in it or not. That was the stance of the Catholic Church. Or it wasn't actually an official miracle, but everyone was like, a miracle happened here. She went with her church to go kind of on a pilgrimage to San Damiano. And when she arrived, she was unable to enter the shrine. She said that the soil beneath her feet, it burned like fire. And she walked around to the back of the shrine, tried to kind of enter through the back door, if you know what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. And she still couldn't get in. And when she was looking at the people in the shrine praying, it seemed to her like all of them were gnashing their teeth, which, they weren't, but it looked like that to her. And she said, "My will is not my own. someone else is manipulating me. At the shrine, there were these medals that you can buy, kind of like a necklace type of thing. And her dad got her one, and she couldn't put it on because she said when it was on her, it hurt so much. It pressed on her chest so much that she couldn't breathe. It was crushing her. And she also felt like she couldn't look at the holy artifacts. She couldn't look at the pictures of Jesus. She couldn't look at the crucifix. It said it was blinding her eyes. And, you know, she loves Catholicism. You know what I mean? Like, this is very weird. And there was another woman there who I believe was a member of the same church as her. And she was wearing one of those medallions that you could get at San Damiano, and it was under her shirt. And Anneliese ripped it off of this woman. Her name is Thea. She ripped it off of Thea. She grabbed the medallion, threw her shirt, and ripped it off.
So first of all, how would you even know it was there?
Exactly.
Because it's under her clothing. And even if you could see a chain, you don't know what's kind of trinkets sitting there. That it knew, whatever was in her knew what that woman was wearing.
Yes. And then when they were leaving San Damiano, Anneliese started mocking this woman, Thea, which is very unlike Anneliese. You know, she's very respectful, very kind, courteous.
She doesn't roast. She's not a Rajneesh.
She's the opposite of Osho. She's not a roast master general.
She does not go into roast mode. This girl had no roast mode previous to this.
No, and she was straight up roasting her ass. So, and she was mocking her. I think she even pushed Thea down when they were getting on the bus.
Dear God.
And the way that she was speaking and mocking Thea was in this really low, manly voice that they had never heard before.
Like Sam Elliott?
It was Sam Elliott.
Hello, I'm Anneliese Michel.
Anneliese Michel. But no, it was like in a scary way that was, people were like, this is not her voice and we've never heard her make this voice before.
Right.
This is weird. And also, there was a very, very nasty smell. It smelled like something burning like feces or burning hair or just something that was burning that was really bad. And the whole bus was able to smell this. It was not just Anneliese was smelling things, because that is something that she had been experiencing. She had been experiencing these really, really nasty smells as well, like we talked about with the beautiful smell when she believed that the Virgin Mary visited her. When she was having these attacks, she also had felt like she could smell this really, really nasty smell, but it had pretty much just been her smelling it at this time. But now on the bus, the whole bus was like, this is disgusting. But it was also like, she didn't shit herself. It wasn't like, oh, that's what it was. It was something was burning. Everyone noticed it.
And from what I've understood, it wasn't always that it seemed to be emanating from her. It was just around.
Right, exactly. It wasn't like it was, right, exactly.
It wasn't like it was like obvious, like, oh man, when she'd walk by, it was just around.
So they get back and they're like, that was really strange. And they go contact some priests. And they're like, okay, we've been really approaching this from a medical standpoint. Anneliese has seen so many doctors. She's, been taking lots of different medications. And the medications, she had been prescribed a bunch of anticonvulsants or anti-seizure medications. And it really, really took a toll on her. She didn't really feel like they helped her, but she felt all of like the negative side effects from it. She just was extremely tired, just completely wiped out, depressed, like even more so than she was. Like, so they went to the priests, and the priests were like, okay, this kind of seems like mental illness. You should go to a neurologist.
Okay.
And they were like, we have. She did continue getting medical help. She really didn't want to, but she did continue to go see doctors and everything. But eventually, Father Roth and Father Alt were the two kind of the biggest players in terms of her exorcism, at least that we are going to talk about.
Right.
So they became involved. Father Alt is a very, very interesting priest. His background is very cool. Some of the people, when there was a trial about this whole case later, which we'll get to, he was described as being like very weird, basically. He's definitely kind of like a different guy that I think a lot of people, especially at the time, didn't really know how to take and thought was weird, because he was actually very, very interested in ESP. He was really interested in the idea, kind of like what we were just saying, honestly, is that there's a connection between biology and a religious experience. And he also believed telepathy, and he believed in psychic gifts. And so he didn't feel like he was psychic, but he did kind of think of himself as kind of like an empath. He was able to kind of just like get the vibe of people, you know?
Right.
Before he even was involved in the case, Father Roth, because Father Roth was involved before Father Alt. So Father Roth approached Father Alt to talk about Anneliese's case. And he actually wrote in a letter, said, and I quote,
Suddenly, I was able to describe the whole family. Father, mother, sisters, and grandmother. Something I could not possibly know since I had never seen them. As to Anneliese, I could feel an enormous radiation that originated from her neck, or rather her thyroid and her head. I did not detect any illness. This, of course, did not permit any conclusions as to whether she was possessed or not.
So I think that's interesting because I think it's really easy to be like, wow, this man is crazy. But it's also important. There is a chakra in that part in your kind of your throat.
That is interesting.
That is something that is relevant and prevalent in many different cultures and religions.
That is fact. Because where did you say it was the
like
thyroid?
The thyroid area, yeah.
One of the things I vividly remember about the first time I saw The Exorcist, she's calling her mom because it's like slamming her on the bed, and then all of a sudden it hits, and I just remember her throat inflates. Like, this, you're assuming this is the moment where he actually enters the body of the child, and her throat, like almost like a bullfrog.
Yeah.
It just burned in my head because it scared the living piss out of me.
Yeah. The throat chakra, among many other things, you know, I'm not an expert on this, but it's sort of thought to be kind of like connecting your brain and your thoughts to the rest of your body. Believe, you know, what you will with that, but I definitely think it's interesting. And especially because he said too, he's like, I know that this doesn't mean she's possessed. It's just kind of like a very interesting aspect of it. And then 2 days later, he got letters from Anneliese and Anneliese's mother, Anna. He felt so sick and nauseated when he received these letters that he felt like he could just faint at any second.
And not because of the content
No,
of the
he
letter.
could-
It was
he
just
couldn't-
the letter. There was something about the essence of the letter.
Exactly. He couldn't even read the letters. And then that evening, he was celebrating Mass. There is a part of Mass where there is the transubstantiation, which is supposed to be where the bread and wine changes over to the body and blood of Christ. That's the idea in the Catholic Church. And he said right at that moment, something hit him in the back, and all of the air around him turned cold. And he said it took every ounce of focus in him to be able to finish the Mass. That night, when he was trying to go to sleep, he said that the room was just full of these horrible, horrible smells. He said it was literally infernal. And he said the room was super, super cold, but he was sweating profusely. Like he just could not stop sweating. And then he began to pray to Father Pio. And then he was quoted as saying,
Suddenly my room was filled with such an intense fragrance of violets that I thought I had dumped my aftershave lotion in my pajamas. Strangely, at the same time I stopped perspiring and my body felt warm. I breathed with relief, only to discover, to my amazement, that my field of vision had been very much narrowed, and that my color perception was reduced.
So the next day, he was on a walk with Father Roth, and they were talking about Anneliese's case. They were talking, they're chatting, they're walking, having a blast. But when they start talking about Anneliese, they both start smelling these terrible smells again. And they're outside. When they bring her up, these smells start happening again. So around this time, actually, surprisingly, completely contrast with all of the negative things that were going on, Anneliese actually met a boy. So she met a boy, and she started dating this boy named Peter.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And he was an angel. He really liked her, and he told her that, and she was upfront with him saying, like, sometimes I get really depressed and there's nothing I can really do about it, and I don't really know what's going on with me. I don't know what I'm even really capable of doing, you know, capable of loving. And he was totally fine with that. He just loved her and was with her until he was there the day that she died, the whole time. So he was really an amazing presence for her, because at this point, which this is wild, Anneliese was also trying to go to school. She was trying to like go to college essentially at the same time. So she was going through all of this, and that's where she met him. And so this was 1975. And at this point, her legs weren't working very well. They weren't, like, she was having trouble bending her legs.
Right.
And at one point, her roommate saw her in bed. Her face was just frozen in this really, really intense demonic looking face. You might even be able to call it a frotzen. And she was just super rigid and was laying in bed, and she looked like that for 30 minutes.
Ooh.
Later, on August 3rd, 1975, they performed the first exorcism on her. And, you know, she was yelling during it, saying, "Stop, it's burning." And she tried to rip the book with the exorcism rites out of the priest's hands.
Oh, wow.
And but that was just the first exorcism. So at this point, Anneliese and Peter, they went back to school. They were trying to sign up for classes that fall. And apparently, when she got back to school, she walked into her room and she became completely rigid while looking at the crucifix that was hanging up in her wall. Her face was just like full of hatred, and she was growling like an animal. And Peter was with her, and he saw this happening, and he started praying silently in his head. And she immediately turned to him and ordered him to stop praying for her. He was praying in his head, and she knew it, and she told him to stop. And that's not the first time that had happened. Her friends one time were with her, and they were praying for her, and she said, "Stop doing that, it hurts." And they were praying for her silently in their heads. So as time went on, unfortunately, things just got worse and worse and worse. Anneliese sometimes would only sleep for like 2 hours a night. She would run and scream around her house for hours, and then she would just be completely rigid for several days.
Wow.
She felt like she was not allowed to eat. She felt like whatever was within her was keeping her from eating. She wanted to, but it was like something wasn't allowing her.
Right, exactly.
But she was eating flies and spiders.
Ugh.
She also urinated on the kitchen floor and would lick it up. And sometimes she would put her head in the toilet. One time she was under the table and she was barking like a dog, and no one could get her out. So they called Thea, her friend, and also like the fellow parishioner, to help. And Thea had to instruct her 3 times in the name of the Holy Trinity to get out from under the table. And she did. They said very calmly, after she had been ordered 3 times in the name of the Holy Trinity, she just got out from under the table and sat on a chair like nothing happened.
Wow.
And then some stigmata appeared. Stigmata is thought to be like the wounds of Christ when he was nailed to the cross. So essentially it's wounds on your palms and then on your feet. When Father Alt would be there sometimes, Anneliese would run full speed at him like she was going to attack him. But then right when she got like right up in his face, she would freeze, and then she would walk away. And then she'd do it again. She'd run from a different angle trying to attack him, but then right when she got to him, it was like she couldn't. There was like a barrier. So in September, a more intense form of exorcism was approved by the bishop in the area. The bishop, though, did say that he wanted all of these exorcisms to be done in secret. Because, like we said, even though exorcisms were happening at the time, it still wasn't like a common thing. People weren't
it was a little
like
hush-hush.
And when she was going through her exorcisms, she often would break all kinds of religious items. She'd break rosaries, she'd break crucifixes. When people would try to stop her from doing it, she would say, "No, let me do it. It helps me." One time, Father Alt and Father Roth came, and they had 5 separate bottles of water. And some of the water was holy water, and some of the water was just tap water. And they didn't tell anyone which was which.
What was what, yeah.
And when they sprinkled the tap water on her, nothing happened. Wow. But when they sprinkled the holy water on her, she would scream and say that it burned. And there was no way for her to know. So it's things like this where it's like, no matter, what happened over the big picture, there definitely were things in here that are unexplainable. She would say things like, when they were trying to put holy water on her, she would say, "Put that shit away," or "Stop that shit," when they were doing her exorcisms, which was weird for her. She's like not trash like me, like she didn't swear. And many grown men would be there to try to restrain her, and it was hard for them to restrain her. And she said when they were were asking her how to speak with her when she was in these trances during the exorcism, she said,
I can speak any language, but feel free to speak to me in German.
and at some points during the exorcism, she would correct the priest's Latin, and she was able to answer questions in Dutch and Chinese. So the Latin may be explainable.
Right,
Because she did take Latin in school.
Right.
And she's Catholic, like super Catholic.
Right.
So it's possible that she did know. But at the same time, you would think it would be hard for her to be able to correct
Exactly.
Latin from someone who also knows Latin.
Yeah.
But who know? But maybe she could do that. But the Dutch and the Chinese doesn't make much sense. And the sources just said Chinese. I don't know if it was Mandarin or Cantonese or so. Apparently, there were 6 different demons inside Anneliese Michel. And the 6 demons, at least 6, that they were able to find out and to name. One was Cain. He was the first child of Eve. He was the first murderer. Another was Nero. He was a Roman emperor who, he set fire to Rome. He burned a lot of Christians. Bad guy. Judas, betrayer of Jesus Christ.
Old Iscariot.
There he is. Also a disgraced priest named Fleischmann.
I wondered what that was when I saw.
Yes.
Yeah.
Fleischmann was a disgraced priest from the 16th century. He was a Catholic priest from Bavaria, which is the same area of Germany where Anneliese is from.
Right.
He was removed from his post for assault, drunkenness, and murder. And just a fun little situation, he was the former pastor at the church that Father Alt was currently the pastor of.
Wow.
So the 5th one, Hitler.
Okay, that's self-explanatory.
There we go. And number 6, the big old guy himself, Lucifer. Yeah.
And at the end of this, we will play you some audio clips that are very disturbing. It's ghastly. We'll get to, I'll describe it more before we play it, but yes.
Right. They claim to be the 6 different demons possessing her. So much of her exorcisms were recorded. So a lot of you are probably thinking, these are really the heavy hitters.
Right.
Are these, they're all really, except Fleischmann, except maybe in the area people would know who Fleischmann was, but this is very famous, notorious people. So some people might be this is too much of a coincidence. You're just listing the worst people you can think of, Cain,
it's
Hitler.
The Beatles of bastards.
Right,
it's
exactly.
the Beatles of the worst people ever.
Yeah. So for some people that I think they think that's too good, not too good to be true, but you know what I mean. Who knows? Maybe some of these demons were lying. Maybe that's not actually who they were.
But they call him the father of lies for a reason.
Exactly.
Who knows?
Yeah. And it's also a little confusing too because demons are not people.
Yes.
So Hitler and Judas, it doesn't quite line up. But I think the idea is kind of Judas or Hitler is speaking through a demon that they're working with,
or maybe it's they choose those names because they know for humans those names mean evil.
Anneliese felt like she could, at this time, communicate directly with the Virgin Mary and sometimes even Jesus Christ himself.
Really? So in the midst of all this, she felt like she could...
She wasn't constantly acting out. She went through periods of time where she was fine and she acted like herself and she acted normal. During those times, sometimes she would say quickly feed me now, because she was oh, okay, I can eat right now. So she would try to eat as much as she could. She would drink 2 liters of juice in a sitting because she was she didn't know the next time she was going to be able to eat or anything. But yeah, so she said she could speak with Jesus and the Virgin Mary. She believed that they were communicating with her, saying that she was atoning for the sins of the world.
Wow.
And they were saying you can let go now or you can keep suffering and that will save more people. And she said that she wanted to go through with it. She wanted to save as many people as she could and atone for as many people as she could, which is very sad and heartbreaking. And she said, I always thought I would want to suffer for others so they wouldn't have to go to hell. But I did not realize it could be this bad and this cruel and terrible. So she was really, really suffering.
Horrible.
She told Father Alt in April, she said May and June were going to be really, really, really terrible and really tough. But July would bring resolution. And she really, really felt that way. During Holy Week, which is the week leading up to Easter, she was actually able to go to church, which was great for her. She was so happy because she hadn't been able to do that in a long time.
Right.
She wasn't able to enter a church. And when she was able to, it was really terrible. But
right.
So she was very happy to be able to go. And it was the Tuesday of Holy Week. She went to church and she was praying. And She tried to get up and leave, but she kept falling back on her knees. And this happened so many times that her knees were bleeding. And it wasn't until the next morning that she was able to get out of the church. Not long after that, she did go to church with Peter, and she was kneeling and she wouldn't get up. She was kind of in one of these trances, and Peter could not pick her up. Keep in mind, she was very, very slight and thin in the first place, especially now.
Right.
So he should be able to pick her up.
Exactly.
Father Alt actually came to the church and prayed over her, and then she was able to get up and leave. She injured herself a lot. She had huge black eyes. She would hurt herself all the time. And even at some point, she asked if people could tie her up so that she wouldn't hurt herself. On May 30th, the priests brought in a medical doctor to see her because they knew that she was really, really in a bad way. And apparently, when he walked in, he said, "My God, she's got the stigmata. There's no injections against the devil."
Jesus.
Later on, when this went to court, he denied saying this.
Right.
But a few people have said that he did say it, so who knows what actually happened. Now, June was really, really terrible. Things were really, really ramping up, and she was in a bad way. In fact, the tendons in her knees were they had ripped.
Oh.
Her knees were broken. There's something called genuflecting that you do in church, and usually you do it when you walk up to a pew before you sit down, where basically you kneel and you do the sign of the cross. Some of the time she had to do that in her exorcism, like during the exorcism rites, but other times she would just do it over and over and over. Like it was like a compulsion of hers. Who knows if it was an actual compulsion,
Right.
or if it was the demons forcing her to do this.
Right.
One time, apparently, she genuflected over 600 times in one session.
Good God.
Keep in mind this. So these are essentially, it's like doing squats, but she hasn't eaten in months, and she's doing it over and over and over and over and over again. So she was really, really in a bad way. At this point, she had been suffering off and on for about 8 years. So on the last day of June, they were doing her final exorcism, and she had a terrible fever, and she kept saying, "Please, absolution." And they kept doing the exorcism rites. Near the end, everyone was leaving the room, and she said, "Mama, please stay with me. I'm afraid." And so her mom stayed with her for a little bit, and then she fell asleep. And they believed at the end of this last exorcism that it actually worked. That's what they believed. But she fell asleep, and she never woke back up. Anneliese died on the first day of July, which is, now keep this in mind, okay? July is the 7th month of the year. June is the 6th month of the year. There's a lot of connections with the number 6 with the devil.
Obviously.
And 7 is considered to be a holy number. You know, God created the earth,
Right.
7 days. 7 is supposed to be the number of completeness and perfection and spiritual awakening. The number 7 is significant in many religions.
Right.
And cultures, not just Christianity. Her exact time of death I don't think is known, but she died probably not long after it became July 1st.
Right.
It's exactly what she said was going to happen.
Exactly.
She said that July will bring resolution. It did, unfortunately not in the way that you would like. An autopsy was done on her, and it was stated that her cause of death was malnutrition or dehydration or starvation, kind of a combination of all of it. And apparently she was in a semi-starved state for almost a year. When she died, she was 68 pounds. It hurts to even say, yeah.
It almost defies reality. It almost is like how? Like
how can an adult human being be under 70 pounds?
Exactly.
Yeah, it's terrible. So interestingly though, in her autopsy, her internal organs, including her brain, seemed to be healthy.
Really?
Which is strange. And there were no bed sores on her body, which apparently is very common for people with starvation. She wasn't laying down all the time, so maybe that has to do with it. I don't really know the medical details about how that happens, but apparently most people that suffer from starvation have bed sores. So the 2 priests and Anneliese's parents were charged with negligent homicide. The authorities thought that this was completely avoidable, and especially since she could have been saved up into a week before she died if they had gotten her medical treatment, was really hard on everyone. During the court case, it was a very, very interesting court case because it's like, how do you prove this and how do you disprove it? You know, it's like it's really comes down to belief and what each person thought was happening.
Exactly.
The bishop was questioned and he said that he wasn't aware how negative her health condition was when he allowed the exorcisms. Who knows if that's true or not? That's what he said.
Wow.
Also, something that makes it a little complicated too is that Anneliese specifically said that she didn't want to be force-fed and she didn't want to be sedated and she didn't want to be sent to a hospital. So she's over 18, she can make her choices, but at the same time, it's like, was she in the right state of mind to make those choices? That's kind of like the either side of it. And the Michels, their lawyer said that the exorcism was legal under the German Constitution because it protects citizens with their right for their own religious beliefs. Whereas the other side of it, the prosecution was saying that this woman was clearly mentally ill and that's all that was wrong with her. There wasn't anything else. And that could be true.
Right.
I don't know. All of the people, the two priests and Anneliese's parents were charged, but thankfully, I think at least, and I don't know if this is a thing in America. I don't know if it is, but like her parents were found guilty, but they said that the death of their daughter was punishment enough.
Right. So it's sentence served, essentially.
Exactly. So they didn't have to go to jail. Yeah. So they were charged and they were on probation, but they didn't have to go to jail or anything like that. And with the priests, they initially were sentenced to 6 months in jail, but then they kind of same situation where they were on probation.
Wow.
And sentencing that was given to them was stronger than what the jury wanted. They believed that this was wrong and that Anneliese needed medical attention, but they were understanding. They didn't really want much to happen to these people, which I think is really interesting. During this time as well, a nun that was also from Bavaria said that she had a vision that Anneliese's body was still intact, that it had not begun to decompose at all. So they actually exhumed her body. The reason why Anneliese's parents did it was, when she died, it was so quick. We just got a cheap coffin to bury her in, and we would like to get a nicer coffin for her. But also they really wanted to see her, to see, maybe because if her body was still intact, this is proof that she actually was possessed and maybe she could be a saint.
Exactly.
So they did exhume her body, and they did not allow the priests or Anneliese's family to look at the body, but they said that it had begun, like any body, to decompose. They wouldn't let them, but I think it was more so they didn't let them because you don't want to see this.
Exactly.
I don't think it was like a conspiracy. I think they were like, you don't want to see this. That is interesting. But also at the same time, it's like, that's not the only way to prove or disprove something. It doesn't, just because her body had begun to decompose, it doesn't really mean anything either way, but that's what they were kind of hoping for. So after this, the number of exorcisms in Germany decreased like drastically.
Yeah.
Pope John Paul II, actually in 1999, so fast forwarding a few years, he made the rules stricter to obtain an exorcism.
Right.
Partially because of this
right.
case. The Catholic Church's stance right now is that Anneliese Michel was mentally ill. And she was
so
not.
Even the church now.
Even the church is saying that. But I don't know if the church is saying that because they're trying to be like, hey, we're cool. Like, we made a mistake, but we're not going to do it again. And they're just kind of pretend, like they're just like trying for PR. Or if maybe they really do. My guess is it's probably a little bit of both. I think they probably realize that. And it's a really slippery slope with exorcism. And so it's nowadays to get an exorcism, I think you need permission from the Vatican itself. So it is pretty, intense. In 2013, something happened. There was a chapel that her parents built on their property of the sawmill that they had, and it burned down recently in May 2013. And then a little bit later, the house that Anneliese Michel lived in and where all of these exorcisms took place, no one lived there anymore, but it burned down. And there's pictures of it, and they think you can see an outline of someone in the smoke. And the day that this happened was June 6th, 2013. If you add the numbers of 2013 to 013, it's 6. So her house burned down 666.
Wow.
The local officials say that it's arson, but no one has been charged. We don't know what it was. Anneliese's grave is still kind of a pilgrimage for a lot of Catholics, even though nothing has been officially stated by the Catholic Church in terms of sainthood or anything like that, but just still people will go there to thank her or to pray to her. So it's very interesting, and she really wanted to just get the word out. That was kind of her whole thing. She was like, I want people to know about the devil. I want people to know to like be good.
And now, Creep Street, we are going to play for you an excerpt.
Rosenfastmonat, weißt du ja, ne?
Ja.
Aber die wenigste beten. Ja. Und in Kirche wird auch mal der wenigste gebeten, weil die Herrn Pfarrer ja das für unmodern halten. Ja. Ja. Alle? Fast. Die sind ja so blöd, wenn sie eine Ahnung hätten. Ah! Warum? Ja, warum? Ah! Eine. Nein, ich sag's nicht. Weil er eine starke Halsmaul. Ja. Weil er eine starke Waffe ist.
Well, that is going to wrap it up for the possession of Anneliese Michel. Maureen, thank you for doing all that super creepy research.
It is my pleasure.
Ladies and gentlemen, once again, my name is Dylan Hackworth.
I'm Maureen Bogey.
This is Creep Street. Citizens of the Milky Way, good night and goodbye.
Goodbye.